Welcome to What's on Your Bookshelf with your hosts, Denise Russo and Samantha Powell.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf. This is a podcast where we are exploring our passions, lifting the lids on our potential, and getting closer to the sense of our purpose by looking at the books and learning from those that are on our bookshelves. My name is Denise Russo, and I am here once again with my friend Sam Powell as we're walking through Coach Wooden by Pat Williams. These are the 7 principles that shaped his life and will change yours. Sam, it's so good to be here with you again today.
I'm super excited to be here, and I can't wait to talk about this chapter with you because this is the one that, as soon as I went through the 7 principles in the intro, I'm like, oh, this is the one that I can't wait to talk to Denise about. So this is principle number 4, which is drink deeply from good books, especially the Bible. And as soon as I read the drink deeply from good books, I knew this was the one that would call to your heart the most, because that's what this whole podcast is about. And so, why you're doing what you're doing, and you have probably more books on your bookshelf than anybody I know, and I've got a bunch behind me too. But this chapter kicks off with the quote, which I think summarizes the chapter really well, of drink deeply from those great books of your own choosing, and you will enrich yourself. So, Denise, tell me your thoughts on this chapter. And oh my gosh, we probably have so much to talk about just because this is it. This is this is what we love here.
This is the big one. I will say that everything that I have learned about myself as a person, as a leader, as a parent, as a family member, as a friend, have come from the pages of books. I remember being a little girl and just always loving to read. But interestingly, I've never been a really big fan of fiction books. I've always been that person that most of the books on my bookshelf are business and self-development books, but I love them. And I can't even tell you how many. I can tell you this. I took over 100 down and put them into some crates at the front of my office, thinking that maybe, just maybe, we'll start doing some giveaways at some point, because they're books that I have gotten so much joy from, but I know I probably won't read again. And I'm really conscious now about having the books that are forefront on my shelf that are the ones that I'll go back to time and again.
Yeah, I think I need to do some reorganization of my shelf too. And I'm thinking I need to run to IKEA and grab a couple more bookshelves too, because I've got them now doubled up to where they're in front and behind. And if they're behind, I'll never, ever see them. But yeah, I'm the opposite of you. I'm more of a fiction book person than a nonfiction book. But like you, I read a ton of self-help, leadership books, things like that. And some of those are the ones that have really shaped my thinking and how I've led, how I work, things like that. But, the fiction books for me too have shaped me, I think, just as much, if not more. I mean, I grew up in that Harry Potter generation where, I was an older kid when they started to come out, but when the series finished and then the movies finished, I was a fully grown adult by that point. So I grew up in that. I don't know. I think there was a bit of a rejuvenation in reading through those books with people. So I hit that pretty well.
You're going to have to come visit me, and I'll take you over to Universal Studios and we'll walk through the lands where Harry Potter lives. And it's so interesting to be able to walk through that with people that have read the books from J.K. Rowling, and to be able to see their face when they see these things come to life, for sure. And for me, the books that I had growing up are most of the books that seem to be banned lately. So I got the privilege of reading them, and now a lot of kids, unfortunately, are not getting to read some of them. I love the library. The library has become something that I had missed, that I haven't been to for a while, but since you and I have some newfound time on our hands lately, I went to the library to renew my library card. And it was like feeling, as soon as I walked in, just this excitement of feeling like I was at home. Olivia, my daughter, she also loves the library. In fact, she takes a lot of her college classes remotely, and she'll go to the library to do her classes. My son, Vincent, he is on a college campus, and when I would call him up in the evening time, he would always say, "I'm in the library. I can't talk right now." And I would always be so jealous, not just because I missed him, which I do miss him when he's gone, but I miss being in the library. So I've really had fun being back in the library over the last couple of weeks.
That's fun. I just went to this is gonna make me sound like a total dork, but I just went to a knitting club in the library. I don't know how to knit, but I crochet. My grandmother taught me. And I don't know, I saw it on the library calendar, and we didn't have anything on our calendar at the time. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go. And it was like me and four other people. And it was actually kind of like just really outside of the box for me and really fun. And I got to learn as I sat there for 2 hours crocheting and chatting with these people that I had just met, all about all of the new things going on at the library and these like 5 million summer programs, which is perfect because I'm looking for ways to entertain an 8-year-old for the summer. So lots of great stuff.
I love that. You're going to have to talk to Olivia because she is a newfound fan of crocheting. My mom has crocheted my whole life, but Olivia has become a fan. She just made a blanket. I know that has nothing to do with reading books, but she made me a turtle. She's made hats. She's made clothes. Like, she's a pro. And it's funny when you think about younger generations, is that they may not get all of their knowledge from books, but they're still getting knowledge from different sources like podcasts or like TikTok videos and things of that sort. So I think it's interesting watching how people still have avenues for learning. And podcasts are fairly new for me to be able to learn this way and express my thoughts. I've always been an avid reader, but I also love to write. So I hope people will keep reading what people are writing.
Yeah, it's I totally agree with that. There are so many different avenues, and this book and this chapter is titled "Drink Deeply from Good Books." And I think you and I will get into talking about what drink deeply really means for us here. But I think there's so many avenues now, like books were, especially as, in the time Coach Wooden was growing up, were the only way to really, immerse yourself in learning, besides talking to other people, in wisdom from people outside of your circle. Like, we are fortunate to live in a world now of overwhelming information, and you can really drink deeply from the learnings of other people in so many different platforms now, right? Like, people that you in your day-to-day life would never, ever, ever meet. And that's the magical thing about books. But now there are so many other ways to do that. I mean, I have drunk deeply from, TikToks, even though it seems funny, but I mean, I've really learned and changed my perspective from, just really immersing myself in that. And that reminds me of a quote in the book where there's this whole, subsection in this chapter about why read. And this is, I think, where you and I are going to probably spend most of our time in this episode today. But the part I had highlighted that I loved is, through the magic of books, we can experience thousands of lives, visit thousands of places, time travel through history, and explore an infinite array of ideas. And I think, that's kind of what we're talking about here, is there's so many avenues to do that now. But, I'm a big fan of fiction books. And so I've lived a million, a million lifetimes. I've been a wizard. I've been a professional football player who fell in love with a teammate. I mean, I've been everything, like, through reading books and, on these different journeys. And it really has, expanded my perspective of humans, of how we interact with each other, of, perspectives that I just would have never gotten had I not, one, read the book, but two, really thought about it, right? Like, I don't know how many times I end up like reading a term in a book and I have to Google it and be like, what is this, right? And, really kind of, and that's that drinking deeply part. Like, what does that, look like? And you and I were talking about this a little bit earlier in the week as we were chatting about something else. But when you think about that drinking deeply, what does that mean for you? Like, what does that look like when you're in that level of reading?
When you're in that level of reading, you're actually living out loud the book, whether it's a fiction book or a nonfiction book. And what you were just referencing is we were talking about how I've already read this book from Pat Williams because I actually had highlighted marks already in the book. But the interesting part about it was I read it by myself. And so when I was rereading the book with you, it was like it came to life in a whole new different way because we were drinking deeply from every chapter and analyzing like what stories are out there in the world right now about these chapters and what ways are these impacting our lives together and what about the experiences that we're having right now. In fact, my favorite part of the chapter that you're talking about under Why Read is the very first part that says, books are inexhaustible sources of knowledge and wisdom about life, the human condition, the world around us, history, philosophy, and more. And so what I'm finding in reading these books is these are lessons that more than 100 years ago became lessons that Hugh Wooden applied to his life, that he then applied and taught his son, who then took those and passed on to thousands of people. And now that includes us. And so it's interesting to see the red thread of how it's all tied together. And in fact, Hugh Wooden's back in their time when John was growing up, he tells a story that they were so poor that they had outhouses, no running electricity and things of that sort. And that every night Hugh would read to the boys. And back then, because they also had no money, they were reading literally only a few things time and again. And so that's why these stories stuck in their mind, whether it was stories from the Bible or Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, those types of books that are classics from the time when John was growing up. It makes sense that these things became life principles for them because they were going back over and again on the pages. In fact, I'm the type of person when I'm reading, Sam, where I used to be the type of person where I didn't even want the binding to be broken because I wanted the books to look good on the shelf. But over the years, I've realized that the best way to live out loud with the books is I've got flags, I've got papers, I've got Post-its, I've got highlighter marks, I've got writing in the margins. Yep. And this is the best way to be able to absorb and drink deeply from the books, I think. In fact, the book also says that a library of good books is a wise collection of friends, mentors, counselors, advisors, and encouragers. Books instruct and entertain. Books affect the course of our lives. And what I love so much about that last part was that the instruct and entertain part was that you were mentioning to me that you're a big fan of fiction. I'm a big fan of nonfiction, but there's some books lately that I've also read that are fiction books, but that have taught me so much more, not just about business, but about heart and about life. And I don't know if you've read, there's a book that came out not long ago called The Tattooist of Auschwitz, and then a follow-on book called Silka's Journey. Have you heard of these books?
The Tattooist one, but not the other.
So the second one is like it's like the second episode of the first book, if you will. It's about a character from the first book. And these are books where I think it was right when I first was laid off, I started thinking, oh, now I've got all this time that I can do things. Let me go read a book that is for fun, not for business. And it was a book that was recommended to me, and it was so just interesting and engaging and really heartfelt that I think the first book I read in like 2 days, and I was staying up till I don't know what time in the middle of the night because I couldn't put the book down. And that's what makes a good book, isn't it? When you can turn a page and want to see what's on the next one and the next one.
Yeah, I've lost a lot of sleep over some good books.
Yeah.
And I really can't say I regret it.
Yeah. I love reading. I have a friend who will often post whatever she's reading, and she built this little thing that looks like a mailbox in her yard. And so when she's done reading, she puts them in there, hoping they can be passed forward to others. In fact, some of my favorite books are books that people have gifted to me or that I've been able to gift on to others as well. And so I think it's fun to be able to share the pages with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's one of those little boxes outside the pool that we go to in our community. And I was like, what a perfect place for a little mini sharing library, because you're sitting at the pool, like you just grab a book and read. And, it's such a cute idea.
I love that. I love that. I would love to know what people are reading. Vincent likes to read books like, in fact, Austin may like these. He loves this book called Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. And so it's like sports related. In fact, it might even be good for your coaching company. So for those listening that don't know, Sam has a coaching company called Lead the Game, which is kind of sports themed and about how to take the analogies and lessons from sports and build them into life. Olivia loves reading all kinds of books, and she's actually studying psychology in college right now. So she's reading a lot of psychology books, but I think that she loves reading books about fairy princesses and Disney type things.
Yeah. Austin's recently, my son's gotten into I guess Derek Jeter is a best-selling author. Did not know that, but he's a famous baseball player, like really famous baseball player. And he apparently is an author now, but we found a couple of his books at our local bookstore. And he has one of his chapter books in his backpack. He reads it during quiet time at school. And yeah, he's really into a lot of the sports books. But yeah, I think that's the interesting thing. I mean, one of the things that changed for me as I found in reading is really finding my niche, right? So if I go back a couple principles, right, to being true to yourself, right? Like if I really I took a look in the mirror for a minute of what are the types of books that I keep kind of coming back to and looking at and things like that. And when I finally figured out what all those key words are, right? Like what I really love is a Hallmark movie in a book, right? And so what I found was I like romance. I like low angst because, I got enough angst in my real life that I like that. I like that little bit of escapism, right? To, do that. But I think that, that's one of the things when I think about people finding books, a lot of times people are like, oh, I just don't like to read. Oh, I can't get into anything. What I always encourage people to think about is, where are your interests lies? Think about what are the types of shows that you watch on Netflix? What are the things that you gravitate towards when it comes to entertainment? And as long as you can kind of start to find those descriptions, it takes a little bit of playing around with it. If you love murder mysteries, if you're, if you're the person who's reading or watching all the true crime things on Netflix, there's a whole genre of books for you that are just as interesting, right? And, and there's so many easy ways to read now. That's the other thing, people are like, oh, I don't want to store a million books, or, oh, making it to the library is hard, which I totally get. I hadn't stepped in my library for a while, but there are a lot of really easy tools now for people to read. There's the Libby app. So if you go to the library and you get a free library card, right? Libraries are free. It's awesome. But if you get a library card, there's Libby, which is an app, Libby, and then Hoopla, Hoopla. I know those are at least in the States too that I know of, but they just connect to your library card. And I know me, I live outside of a metropolitan area. And so my library is hooked up to the greater library of the whole city. And so the whole county. So I can check out books virtually for free on these apps, either to just read myself or also listen to, some people like audiobooks over, regular print books and things like that. I know my dad, quote unquote, reads a lot while he does chores around the house. He listens to audiobooks, and that's when he does all of his cleaning. So he gets all this reading in while he's just doing the mundane things in life. So there's lots of easy ways to read that are a little bit creative and a little bit different. Because I think sometimes people are like, oh, just sitting down and reading, I don't have time for that. But if you have time for a podcast, wink, wink, hint, hint, hopefully you're listening to this one, you have time for an audiobook too, right? It'll be a little longer, but those are easy to listen to. And again, free versions on, apps out there in the world now.
You know what else is free at the library that you brought all that up that is a way to get something quick if you want to learn something is they also offer LinkedIn Learning, which I just recently found out.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's really, if you get a chance to just go talk to your librarian and see what's available. I found out this past week that my library offers a virtual book club on a certain book every month, and they will send you the electronic version of the book. So if you have an iPad or a Kindle or whatever, but so for people that like to have an engagement with the book, like we're trying to do together with this podcast, you can read the book with another group of people that may not even live in your same town or go to your library. And it's a virtual book club that's going through these books, but the book is only available for that certain period of time that they give it to you on an electronic bookshelf, and you go through it together. And it's a really interesting tool they have, because when you get the tool through the electronic book club, you can actually highlight different parts of the book. There's a community where you're engaging with the readers about what they're taking away from the book. And those are fiction books. So I joined one just recently because, like I said, I'm a new fan of fiction books. But it's interesting you were saying about different ways that people can engage as well. There's another way, which is that I recently read the book Where the Crawdads Sing, which is also a movie. And the reason that I read the book was I wanted to see if it was different than the movie. So you may find books that were turned into movies and want to be able to just compare. And it's interesting to be able to see the depths that a film producer takes to extract from a book, or the things that remain special that are just inside the book.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I always like doing the comparison between the book and the movie. I have a hard time though. Like if I watch the movie, I have a hard time going back and picking up the book. So I often use the movie as like my reward for
reading the
okay,
book.
I gotta actually read the book first. So I have a lot on my to be read shelf that are movies that I need to circle back around to.
Well, in the book, Brian Tracy, who is a very well-known speaker, he is a friend of Pat Williams, who's the author of this book. And Pat Williams said that Brian Tracy told him that the highest earning 10% of Americans read 2 to 3 hours a day. What do they read? Anything and everything that expands their knowledge and enables them to keep up with a fast-changing world. Books, newspapers, and magazines. Now, at that time, when he told him that was probably predating things like podcasts and, of course, TikTok. But Brian goes on to say that according to the American Booksellers Association, 80% of Americans have not read or purchased even one book in the past 12 months. The average American simply is not a reader. And so I think that's what's so fun and interesting about our podcast, is trying to help people feel encouraged that you may not have the time to read a book. But if you do have the time or an interest to listen to people talking about a book, what might you learn from it? In fact, when we were both at our former job, we had access to something called Get Abstract, which are book summaries. So there's even an entire business out there where people have summarized books for people to be able to just get the main points. In fact, when I was in college, this is a really long time ago, but when I was in college, I remember I have a friend who started a business while we were still in college, and he started this business called A+ Notes. And what he would do is he would have, the smart kids who liked taking classes at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And I went to a really, really big college. And so the kids that would go to the early classes would go to class and write the notes for the class. They'd go over to his store, which was at a big intersection right by the school, and they would sell him their notes. And then he would photocopy the notes and throughout the day sell the notes. Now, some people would use it as sort of a cheat maybe and not go to class and just get the summary of the notes. I was nerdy, so I would go to class later in the day. My first classes were like at 10:45, but I would go to the class and get the notes as a supplement to reinforce what did I miss, because I find myself often, especially if I'm listening to a public speaker or something like that, I'm feverishly trying to write everything down, but at the same time, trying to listen. In fact, that's what I really loved recently about what has come from COVID. So when COVID happened, conferences, of course, got on pause. And so people could watch things like webinars and conferences virtually. And the ones I loved the most were where I could watch the session and really watch it and just try to understand it and learn from it. But then I could go back and rewatch it and take notes.
Mhm.
In fact, I do that with church. So I will watch the sermon from our pastor the first time through and take notes and look up different verses and things like that. But then I'll watch the second time around. And now this is a little bit different because our church service is more than one time a day over the weekend. So I'll just watch and see, hey, does he do a different joke or have a different way of delivering this part of the message? Or did he say something this time that he forgot to say the other time? Because it's kind of like watching a movie. What can you take out of it the second time around? And I've gotten so much more learning being able to, what we're doing today, drink deeply from good books or podcasts or webinars or conferences or sermons or things of that sort.
Yeah, and so it's one of those things like you don't have to hit a high quantity of the books. It's more about find something that's interesting to you, right? That's going to hold your attention and really spend the time to like read it, reread it, think about what is that book teaching it about you, right? Ask yourself the question, what is it about this book that that really calls to me? Or, what is the thing that's, I think about books that I go back and over and over and over read. I have a few of them, and they're like the ones where, I don't know, I'm in a bit of a book slump. There's nothing I want to read, but I know I want to read because now I have a habit of it. It's why do I keep coming back to this one particularly? Like, right, what is it that's special about this book? Because that can, one, lead you to other things that might interest you, but also that's part of drinking deeply, of really doing that deep exploration that you're talking about. I think that's super fascinating. In college, I took a course. I had a math degree and a religion minor. And the thing that fascinated me about the religion aspect was just, it was the story of people's beliefs, right? Us as a human population, and what did we believe over time in certain regions, and what did that look like? And so we read all sorts of things. And, this chapter is drink deeply from good books, especially the Bible. That was where, John Wooden's faith really lived. But from drinking deeply from, studying in college, right? We would read a book, we would read, from all sorts of religions around the world, and then really spend time exploring all of that and really getting down to it at a different level, and understanding all the context around, especially historical texts or things that go back in time. I mean, that's really part of it, right? You read something and you get curious, you get that little like, like, I don't quite understand this, or, you kind of got to follow that feeling and then go do that. Luckily for us, we have Google now, right? Go do that bit of Googling, that bit of research as to wonder what was going on around this, right? And I think about the classics and reading those and putting that context around books is really, really, really interesting. I did one whole class. It was an entire semester just on one of the Gospels in the New Testament of the Bible. And it was fascinating. I mean, we went word by word, sentence by sentence, stanza by stanza throughout this book over months, right? And it was so interesting and so fascinating to really drink that deeply from one section of one of our great texts that's out there in the world, and super fascinating to read at that level, right? What you and I are doing with this 170-page book. We're spending hours thinking about it, talking about it, exchanging stories. Like that's just something that's super different. But you don't have to do quantity to get to that level, right? You can pick one book. If you don't read it all, pick one book this year and spend time on it, right? Read it slowly. Go read a chapter, go back and reread it, right? Like think about it. Google the things you don't understand. Google the things that spark your interest. Just go find something that calls to you. There's a book out there for you that does that.
Oh my gosh, there's definitely a book out there for you. And in fact, it's funny that you were mentioning even about going line by line in what you were talking about, because two things come to mind for me. One is the kids and I invest in a television series called The Chosen. And in The Chosen, it's basically a television series about taking the book, the Bible, and turning it into what it might be like for the modern thinker, about what it was like during the times that Jesus lived. And there's like these after parts. So if you ever watch a television show, usually they'll have like the DVD of the behind the scenes or outtakes and things like that. So there's this after show, and I've gotten fascinated by one of the advisors to the television show, who's a rabbi, and his name is Jason Sobel. He's got an Instagram and TikTok and things like that, where he takes one word, like one Hebrew word, and spends an entire half hour talking about taking apart the actual letters of that word to describe what it actually means and what it meant, like you said, way back in the day when that one word was chosen for that one sentence in that one chapter of that one book out of 66 that are in the Bible. I wrote a book last December on the verses of a song. So I wrote a book called 12 Days, which is an entire book about what I thought about the 12 days of Christmas, which to me are much more than just singing some strange song about birds and trees and ladies dancing and lords leaping and drummers drumming. So it's fascinating to see what the power of words can do when you do drink deeply.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a part in this chapter that I laughed at. It said the worst thing about new books is that they keep us from reading old ones.
Oh.
I was like, my to be read list is is exactly that. Every time I find something new, it's keeping me from going back and really diving deep. But again, like when you find something that calls to you, it's important to go back to really spend time on it and to really think through what that means for you. I think that helps us in just a grander scale, kind of moving forward with our lives and thinking, more deeply. And I don't know, books are so powerful in that way. And again, like different formats now, right? Of things you can get on the internet, podcasts and, TikToks and, video formats and audio formats and, written formats too. There's so many ways to share that, but I don't know, there's a beautiful thing in really spending time. I think it can help us learn something, but also maybe not feel so alone in our condition too, right? I mean, there's been times where I've read books on various topics of things that have been going on in my life, or just, I don't know, picked up a random book I thought sounded interesting. And, you get that, oh gosh, there's somebody out there in the world who feels the same way that I do, right? Has had the same experience as I do. Or I didn't even realize I had this, and now I have a label for the thing that I thought or felt or, whatever. And I think that's the other kind of flip side, right? You can learn a lot, you can spend time in it, but there's also a connection, I think, that happens when you not only read books and find the people who are talking about it, but then spread that to somebody else and you find the person who also connects with that book that you connected with. And then there's a sense of real community, right? When you think about the book clubs and things like that, you can find those nuggets of people here and there that it's like, me too, right? Like I feel that way, or I thought that way, or, somebody, you think the same way that I do about this. And like, gosh, what a beautiful thing that is.
Well, what's interesting about that as well is that we have an opportunity right now to be able to help the listeners that are listening into this podcast. If there's a book that you want to dive deeper in with your friends or your coworkers, maybe you are looking for leadership development help or self-development help. We are certified coaches, consultants, and trainers as a part of School of Thoughts, and we can do that for you. We're actually certified in, I don't know what the count is anymore, Sam, on what we're certified to teach from John Maxwell alone, but it's dozens and dozens of his books, who's one of our favorite authors. In the book, Pat writes that the benefits of reading are beyond numbering. Books increase your vocabulary, they expand your knowledge, they increase your critical thinking skills, and generally make you a wiser, more interesting, more thoughtful person. You can't help being more effective and successful at anything you do when you're reading and absorbing and drinking deeply from books. So I have a question. For the listeners. If you're willing to share what's on your bookshelf, or what are you reading, or what do you want to be reading, would you share that with us? You can communicate with us on our Facebook page, our LinkedIn page, well, I guess Facebook too, but LinkedIn is probably the better place, which is called School of Thoughts Publishing. We would love to hear what you're reading or what you want to be reading. And then, Sam, my question for you, I'd love to know what's a book that's in your cart that you want to be reading, and what's maybe a book that's you said you go back to time and again that you like to read, even if it's just for fun. What's one of those books?
Oh gosh. My cart of books is so long. It's not even funny, but I do have a small pile of books that I am currently reading or working through right now. Let's see. The one I'm reading right now are the 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth by John Maxwell, right? I've studied that one before. I've looked at that, but I'm really diving deep into that book for the first time. Like I know all the concepts, I know all the laws in it, but really spending time diving deep and drinking deeply from that for the first time now. And I'm really loving that, just because, again, like as a coach, I want to help people grow, and that, really sitting in that and getting to the depth of that book is helping me, on that journey. So that one is on my shelf of stuff that it's there. I read the first chapter, but I gotta because I gotta get back to, the depth of that. And then books I keep coming back to. There's a million like romance novels that I do. I don't know if the audience is really into those, but if anybody is, let me know. I'll give you all my recommendations there. But there's a book I love from when I was little called The Phantom Toll Booth that I've read a million times. That is, again, I have a math degree, so I'm a little bit of a math geek in that space, and it's got a whole bunch of fun in that space, but it's also a little bit fantasy. It's a super fun book, and I read it's a children's book, so you can read it a bunch of times. You can appreciate it as an adult and enjoy it then, but it's fun if you've got kids to read there. So I've gone back to that a million and one times. But what about you, Denise? I'm interested in your bookshelf and what you've read and loved.
I was telling you, we're going to need like 50 years of podcasts to get through all the books on my bookshelf, I think. So for me, let's see standouts. So I will say, first and foremost, the most important book to me on my entire bookshelf is my Bible. I start my day reading it. I try to end my day reading it. I drink deeply from it. I do devotionals before I start my day. And that's the most important book that's on my bookshelf. From a children's book perspective, I'm a really big Dr. Seuss fan. So I have all of his books on my bookshelf. And I would say that there's probably a book that is my favorite because it was a favorite of my kids, which is called The Rainbow Fish. And this is a really great book by a Swiss author. Who also illustrated the book. And so that's called The Rainbow Fish.
That's a beautiful book.
I love that book. My favorite book that anybody ever gave me is called Crazy Busy by a guy named Kevin DeYoung. It's a super short book, but it was given to me at a time when my friend who gave it to me didn't know how much I needed to read it. It was so impactful to me that I gifted away. I can't even count how many books since, but it talks about basically, are you busy or are you productive in life? And are you focused on the things that bring you really true and closer to your purpose? So Crazy Busy is my favorite book that anybody ever gifted me. My favorite book that anybody ever gifted somebody else, which was my son, that became my favorite book, in which we've talked about in the past a little bit, is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It's probably my favorite fiction book that I've used for growing in life. My favorite comedy book is called Learn Me Good, and there's a follow-on book called Learn Me Gooder, and I found that from my son as well. So he found this book, we downloaded it on Kindle, and we took it on a spring break years ago, and he was cracking up so much. Like he was reading it, and all I could hear was he was just laughing. And I looked over, and he wasn't playing video games, and he wasn't playing with kids, and he was just focused in my Kindle. And so I had to know, what was he reading? And so he passed it to me, and sure enough, it is a rib-tickling fun book called Learn Me Good and Learn Me Gooder, which was written by a school teacher.
I almost woke my son up last night. I was putting him to bed, and he was like just in that like twilight, and I was reading a book on my Kindle app on my phone, and I started to giggle. He was like, "What's happening?" I'm like, "Never mind,
Aw.
it's fine."
That's
So,
fine. Well, I'm gonna have to
mhm.
check out the Derek Jeter book he's reading because I'm a big Yankees fan. As you know, I grew up in New York. I know you're in
They're good
Pittsburgh, so that's
books,
a little
yeah.
controversial.
But yeah, that's a good book. That's definitely a good one. I was thinking as you were listening out all your books that I am going to like as we publish this podcast, because I'm not writing them down now. I'm going to go back and put them all in my to be read list. But one of my favorite books that I drank deeply from with a group of people was the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And I cannot remember, there's 3 authors on it, and I can't remember who they all are off the top of my head. But that one we did as part of a leadership development, like our whole leadership team in the department I was in, we all read this same book. And then a consultant came in and talked us through it, right? Like a lot of what you and I do now. And that book, I mean, changed my entire perspective on what commitments really are, what being conscious really is, but also gave this terminology that we utilized in the department. And anybody who read this, we could have this whole conversation. And it was this whole thing of like, oh, I'm below the line right now. And it was like this weird phrase, but we all knew what it meant and it could help us help each other. So it gave us this like kind of connection and space. But it was a study, it was a drink deeply type of thing, but it was with a group of people. And that's one of my favorite books. I go back to that and reread that quite a bit because it's a great leadership book. But and a bunch of my leadership friends and people who worked for me, people I worked for, all read it. So it was that was an interesting experience in this like drink deeply concept.
I think it's a really good idea to go through books as a cohort. In fact, I built an entire team, and part of my career was based off of taking books from my bookshelf and turning them into leadership development courses. I think we're at the count of well over a few thousand people that actually went through these cohort courses. In fact, that's how you and I really got connected at a leadership level, because we were teaching the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0 at that time to a cohort you were a part of. That was another great book. The Conscious Leadership book is also really good. I have that on my bookshelf as well. Again, we'd love to hear, what books are you reading out there and what books do you want to be reading? We're going to leave it maybe as a secret about what our next book is, but it's a book that's
I'm super excited. That just came in the mail, and I told you yesterday, I was like, I got it, and I read the intro, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to desperately read this book. It's going to change my life. I already know it. So yeah, I'm super excited for the next one.
I can't wait to do that book as well. The only book that I have right now, besides the many that are on my shelf that I haven't yet cracked the binding on, is that, the one I'm reading right now is The 16 Undeniable Laws of Communication, which is John Maxwell's newest book.
That's good.
But the book that's in my cart is called Love Plus Work by Marcus Buckingham. And this is what goes back to what you were saying, Sam, about how you find out about books, which is, I was in a seminar from coaching.com was offering some free coaching webinars for their week-long coaching process this past week and this coming up week. And he was a guest speaker. He comes from writing a lot of different books on strengths and knowing your strengths and using data. And he was talking about his newest book called Love Plus Work. So I can't wait to read that one and dive into it. Who knows, maybe it'll end up being on the podcast, or maybe recommendations from our listeners will end up being books that are on their bookshelves that should be on ours as well. But I think next time we're going to be talking about tips for readers, right? Is that what's coming up next? Yeah,
in this chapter, there's 10 tips for more effective reading, right? So when we think about that concept of drinking deeply, that's what we'll talk about next time, is some tips on how to do that. Because I know if somebody just told me like drink deeply from a book, or if you rewind a couple of years ago before I was a pretty avid reader, I would have been like, I don't know what that means or how to do it. But they have some good info in here. So we'll get into that next time.
That sounds good. So what's your accountability, Sam, between now and next time?
Besides reading all the books? Oh gosh, I don't know. Well, like I said, I am the thing I'm just pulling out of my cart is this book that I really do want to, dive deep into. So I think I'm gonna, consciously do that and find some ways to engage with it and live that book as I'm as I'm reading it. And that was my intention when I picked it up out of the cart recently, but really, really making sure a conscious effort to do that. What about you?
I am a reader, but I also love to write. And so I think for me, between now and next time, is that I want to take the principles that we've already learned so far, which is being true to yourself, helping others, making each day your masterpiece, and of course, today, drinking deeply from good books. And I think I want to just take some time to have some reflection and journal. Like, have I really been true to myself? There were some things that happened over the last week that made me really get off balance a little bit with a conversation I had with someone, helping others. Like, what things can I do in the coming week to really make sure that I'm putting others in front of myself? Like, today's my dad's birthday. And so today I'm going to be helping my mom prepare for celebrating my dad, making each day your masterpiece. Right now, that's the foremost, most important thing on my mind. And I really want to dive deeper into thinking about, what do I want out of my life? And am I really pursuing my passions? And am I really getting closer to my purpose? And am I really doing the things like we're doing today on the podcast to lift up my potential? So for me, I'm going to take some journaling time to write about the things that I'm reading.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I heard the other day, or read the other day, that good writers live the books they're writing. And so I think, that's really what you're committing to do there is, write about the things that you've been reading, that you're trying to live, and how do you bring those to life? And that sounds really great. I'll be interested to hear how that goes for you.
Awesome. Well, if you're listening in, thank you so much for sticking with us all the way to the end. We'd love for you to subscribe if you haven't already, and to share this podcast with your friends. We are now on what I think is almost all of the different podcast platforms that are out there. If there's a platform that you know of that we're not listed, let us know that as well. And again, my name is Denise Russo. On behalf of my friend Sam Powell, thanks for joining us today for another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf.